Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here. It's Friday, the 8th day of October 2021. The weekend is coming up. We have a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. Both feet first, shall we? Starting off at the National Hurricane Center homepage here. Invest area 92L off of the coast of the Carolinas here. And 40% chance now of development. And as it says, this lengthy paragraph from the forecaster there, Stacy Stewart, that the area of low pressure is gradually becoming better defined, and even though it's rather disorganized, environmental conditions could briefly become marginally conducive for the low to acquire subtropical characteristics Saturday into Sunday. The low is expected to interact with a frontal boundary, which should end the opportunity for development, and is forecast to meander offshore of the Carolinas, then slowly move back to the west-northwest, maybe back closer to the coast. So, as such, a couple things of note here. Recon has been tasked to go out and investigate this area if necessary tomorrow afternoon. And remember, I've been talking about recently, even though the large-scale favorability pattern in the Atlantic is really not there right now, you do have these little pockets every once in a while of a couple of days where something could become favorable in a regional sense, and you can have this develop as, case in point, right off the Carolina coast there. Not a real big problem, but kind of squally weather. People like to go down this time of year for fishing, deep sea fishing as well as the surf casting, etc., visiting the Outer Banks, the Capes of Virginia down to the coast of South Carolina, going out to the Gulf Stream, etc. So be careful, be aware of this, and the surfers may get a little bit of enhancement of waves, maybe, but the threat of rip currents is definitely going to increase. So please be mindful of this system sitting out there. Again, now 40% chance. I suspect that this will increase over time, and we're going to get this thing to develop. Might even get a named storm out of it. Wouldn't surprise me in the least. All right, looking at the satellite animation this afternoon, courtesy of TropicalTidbits.com. A lot of stuff going on. It's fall, it's autumn, yet we still have the very warm waters of the Atlantic out here, the Caribbean, the Gulf. So there's this battle between the change of seasons and all of this energy that is still sitting out across the tropics, and again through the Caribbean and up in the Gulf and even the subtropics. I'll show you the anomaly map towards the end of today's discussion. So here's the system, very disorganized off the Carolina coast. Wait till we look at it tomorrow. Probably going to become better defined. You got this frontal boundary slowly coming in. That will begin to interact with it. And, once more, just want to emphasize, mainly for our friends along and interest along the North Carolina Outer Banks and vicinity, down to the South Carolina coast as well. Just be aware of this, especially if you're heading out in a small boat, medium-sized boats, whatever. Just remember, as I say, these weather systems are bigger than you. So it doesn't take a big old hurricane, a huge headline-making event to cause problems. And, if there's a party of 6 or 8 people going out to do some fishing in the Gulf Stream, and they get caught in one of these squalls and they capsize and have other issues, well, that could end in tragedy. And the same thing can happen with the high rip current threat along the North Carolina Outer Banks. You got to be careful. Just be respectful and be aware of what's happening with the weather, and you'll do just fine. All right? That's all I ask. Got to keep you alive, right? I talk about that because without you, there's no reason for me to do this. Absolutely. All right. Down in the Eastern Pacific, this is, I think, 92E, if I'm not mistaken, and that E, I'll just draw it in there, is for East Pacific. When we say an L for like 92L or whatever, that's for Atlantic, just in case you were wondering. And they use the numbers 90 through 99 to designate these suspect areas instead of just this disturbance or that disturbance or this blob of clouds or whatever. It's just a way to keep up with what's going on. Really, really neat. You look at this satellite and you go, well, where is it? But then you look at this data product from the University of Wisconsin, and it shows up really well. That's the vorticity down at the lower levels. This is the 850 millibar. Circle it for you down there at the bottom. So it's about 5,000 feet in the atmosphere, and you can really see that rounded look to it. So it's got the low-level skeleton is there, and that energy pocket is there, and it's nice and round. It's not all stretched out like it was earlier in the week when it was farther south down near the Bahamas and the southwest Atlantic. And it is sitting over very warm water. The Gulf Stream runs through there. That water is not only warm, but it's also moving underneath the system, so there is a constant refresh, like a conveyor belt, almost literally, of energized, high upper ocean heat content for this system to tap into. So we'll be watching that. That's that feature there, 92L, and then down in the Eastern Pacific. This is still trying to get its act together, but I think it will. The GFS, the most aggressive, with this eventually winding up its way over here and then making landfall somewhere, 100 miles either side of Puerto Vallarta. Sure, that makes sense right now looking at the pattern. We'll examine that closer, though, as we move through the rest of the presentation. All right, so here is, hadn't visited this site in a while. This is the Tropical Cyclone Guidance Project, part of NCAR. I really like the interface here. And you notice this can kind of tell us what's going on. Must have a pretty good MJO sitting over the Western Pacific and the Maritime Continent region right now. In other words, it's not situated over in the Western Hemisphere. That being said, we still have our soon-to-be tropical storm in the next couple of days in the Eastern Pacific and our area of interest here off the Carolina coast. So again, you can get these pockets of favorability regionally, even though widespread upward motion is focused in another part of the world. We still have activity to keep track of in our part of the world. Well, it just depends on where you're watching, right? But, in the Western Hemisphere, things are still pretty busy. And I want to call something to attention to you here real quick. Let me go back to the satellite. Just kind of think of it this way. Longitudinally, this system down here, 92E, is still the same longitude as the Western Gulf of Mexico. So, it's not like it's way over here or in the Central Pacific. It's regionally within the realm. The only difference is you've got the landmass that separates the Caribbean Sea from the southeastern Pacific. But the atmosphere doesn't necessarily know about that landmass. It does matter a little bit, but I find it interesting that we're getting this to develop along the same longitude area. Again, if we didn't have Central America there, we had just a different land configuration, this would be part of the Atlantic Basin. So it's not that far removed that this is going to develop and move on across and eventually recurve towards Mexico, it looks like. I've always found that kind of interesting to look at it that way. Again, a big difference when something develops here and it's the same longitude region as the Gulf versus way out in the true open Pacific or beyond, farther west from there. So just a little side note for you, a little opinion from yours truly. So what do we got? Well, here's the system off the Carolina coast, some of the track models, etc. Really interesting map, the way these, it's taken into account, and this is automatically generated, some of these models here, the simpler models. But you see it's just kind of sitting around, meanders back towards the coast, and eventually kicks out. Not a real big problem. It's just a local nuisance for anybody, like I said earlier, headed down to the Outer Banks. Some of the guidance indicating that, hey, it could ramp up to tropical storm intensity. So again, don't take this lightly. Don't blow it off completely, but, I'm not hyping it up either. It's not the environment's not there for this to be a hurricane. And I talked about this the other day too, and I want to mention this more in the future, kind of helping people to understand the bigger picture. Everything that ever develops tropically, when we're talking about tropical cyclones, is automatically trying to reach, just from the pure physics, atmospheric dynamics, thermodynamics, all of that, it's trying to reach some portion of what we call the maximum potential intensity, the MPI. How much could this possibly strengthen if everything was perfect? And the ocean temperatures really help to dictate that more than anything. The more upper ocean heat content there is, the higher that MPI value gets. And we look at it in basically wind, pressure, and category. And everything's going to try to get to whatever the regional maximum potential intensity is. And a lot of times when it's over very warm water, these systems, that could be category 3, 4, or 5. So this is sitting over very warm water, and if everything was perfect, it would ramp up and try to become a hurricane easily. But that's the limiting factor here. It's not just the sea surface temperatures and the upper ocean heat content. There's wind shear and dry air and other factors in the atmosphere, mid-levels, upper levels, the way the shear is oriented, how the dry air gets in there. It's complicated. But at the end of the day, just remember, they always are trying as a physical process to get as strong as they possibly can. But then we see the limiting factors here that show most of the guidance indicating that's not going to happen. I know it's a little convoluted what I'm trying to explain here, but looking at the guidance at least helps us understand, just because it's sitting over very warm water, and I can point that out right here, there's the 82 Fahrenheit or 28 Celsius, that's where it's sitting, and will sit for a while, and that water's moving. So everything being equal, if it was under ideal conditions, this could easily become a strong hurricane, but it's not. And this guidance here really helps us to see that. You understand? We can just look at that plotted on this neat little graph and get an idea of where this is headed. And you can even read some of these messages in here if you really want. If you're bored, oh, look at all that. What does all that mean? Well, you can go in and read it. There's the shear and the knots right there. And there's other things like sea surface temperatures, as I was talking about. This is indicating 27. You know, so whatever model this is coming on, this is the GFS version of the ships. So, 81 Fahrenheit, pretty close to 82 right there. And there's other parameters in here, all kinds of stuff, the vorticity, and, just, you can read this if you like. I just think it's fascinating as a weather geek, and I thought I'd point that out. All right, moving on along. 92E, is that right? Or no, it's 91E. Sorry, I know you've probably been screaming at the computer the whole time. It's 91E. I just want to make sure of that. In the Eastern Pacific, Invest Area 91E. All right, I'll take their word for it. 91E it is. So whatever we call it, that's the general track guidance early. This is the very first set of model guidance overall. And the global models are going to do a really good job with this, and the GFS generally brings it up somewhere in this vicinity. Towards midweek or so. So we'll wait and see as this progresses through time. And here is another example. The intensity guidance is much more aggressive overall. This is sitting over warm water. The GFS indicating a solid Category 3. So I think this is going to become a hurricane at some point. And it's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with over in Mexico. Again, I think plus or minus 100 miles either side of Puerto Vallarta. That's my gut right now, my instinct. And some meteorological knowledge, and as such, just kind of throw this out there. Brent Lynn, one of our supporters from down in the Virgin Islands, he and I are tentatively planning to go to Mexico to cover this. I'll talk about that more tomorrow. So there's a little teaser for you. Yep, we're thinking about it, especially with the region that this is going into. It would be a viable option for us to put our skills to work as a team to cover a Pacific Mexico hurricane landfall. First, though, let's see what's happening with 92L. Maybe that's what I did. I got these confused, 91 and 92. This one is 92L. This one is 91E. Whatever. All right. So 92L off the coast of the Carolinas. There it is right there. The 12Z guidance from earlier today. Move this out. You see what happens. It does try to get energized there, just a little bit, more amped up as we get towards late tomorrow night into early Sunday. So again, you folks along the outer banks of the Carolinas here, you could have some 35, 40 knot onshore flow, maybe some overwash, Rodanthe, the Merlo Beach area, the usual spots, Pea Island National Seashore, and then Sound Side on the western part of the Pamlico Sound. You could get some shallow flooding, Cedar Island area. It just depends on where the wind is coming from, the fetch, the duration, and the direction. And then this eventually, merges with that front and whatever, and off it goes. So we're out at about day 5. A little bit of disturbed weather coming in through the Caribbean and the north side of this tropical wave energy into the Florida Strait region. High pressure anchored over the deep south. Is fall ever coming for the east? Not that I'm complaining, because I like the warm weather, but this is a very interesting pattern as we get into the latter part of October. and the MJO does swing back over to the Western Caribbean and vicinity, Western Hemisphere as a whole, this may really come into play. It's been so warm, and these fronts have been limited, not coming down and disturbing everything down here. That hasn't been happening. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of energy to still work with, even late October and beyond. Already looked at this, but just a reminder, yes, water temperatures are still plenty warm for this to get energized. I will just go on record as saying, I bet, and I'm expecting, that this becomes subtropical storm, maybe full tropical storm, Wanda, before all is said and done. The 21st name of the year. Yes, there will be people that will complain about it and think it's a waste or whatever, to which I say, look, it's valid. We talked about it. You see it. It's there. It's an entity all in of itself. It's not attached to a front. It's going to affect an area of land and marine interest, so forth and so on. It might be short-lived, but it's still, in my humble opinion and professional opinion, if it gets named, I think it'll very much be a name. It'll be a tropical or subtropical storm. And it certainly has enough energy there to work with. And just real quick, too, that subtropical versus tropical, I know it's confusing. That's just a classification thing scientifically. The effects are still generally the same. Windy, squally, impacts, etc. What we call it in the scientific world kind of doesn't matter in terms of the end game for you guys where these systems end up. All right, moving on to the Eastern Pacific. Again, Brent and I have our eyes on this, as you should if you live in this area of Mexico especially, and maybe even up in the Baja region and farther north and west from Puerto Vallarta. I'll show you why I say that in a moment. But let's scroll this out, see what happens. It gets its act together, and the GFS is really aggressive with this system. That vorticity signature is perfectly round, as good as it gets. It really is. And it rounds the corner. There's a big trough that digs in up here, and it makes that corner and comes in just north and west of Puerto Vallarta, sometime midweek or so, as a fairly intense hurricane. And then the way the modeling handles the mountains of Mexico, it kind of disappears, but then it pops out. Yes, believe it or not, some of that energy comes across Mexico and ends up in the Northwest Gulf. That is more than a week out, so don't go getting all upset about it just yet. That would be really interesting if that happens, and there is precedence for it. The leftovers of Patricia, a very violent hurricane, small but very intense hurricane, the most intense hurricane ever, 215 mile per hour winds back in 2015. That energy made it across. It was farther to the south, and it didn't get a new name or anything, and it was not, it was darn close. It kind of was a hybrid system, brought some flooding over to Houston, and it was kind of raised a big ruckus, as they say, in the Northwest Gulf, the leftovers of Patricia. I was out there for that. I went there, not to Mexico at that time, but I went to the Gulf for Patricia at the end of October of 2015. So we got to watch this. This one will be Pamela, if I can say it, which ironically replaced the name Patricia. So we'll watch that closely. The Euro, by the way, kind of a different story, brings it up much weaker. So it feels the lower steering flow more, so it pushes it farther to the west, intensifies a little bit, comes across the Cabo San Lucas area, and then much farther up the coast from where the GFS has it. Let's try to do that. See the difference there? Yeah, pretty remarkable difference. I think, truthfully, that it'll be more intense than the Euro is showing, and these deeper systems will feel that trough more and curve earlier. And so again, that Puerto Vallarta region, plus or minus 100 miles, could be the target area, and that's where Brent and I will more than likely be next week. And again, I'll talk about it more tomorrow as we solidify things and we get more guidance. We're still talking about 5 to 6 days out, and a lot of planning that has to be done, so we'll address it more tomorrow. And just real quick, other people are noticing the discrepancies between the Euro and the GFS. This is Kaylin Patel talking about it, and 91E in the Pacific. Okay, good. I was wrong earlier. It's not 92. It's definitely 91. The GFS is stronger. The Euro is weaker. And so, yeah, you get different outcomes. And then I was explaining to my wife earlier about how that works, that these little weaker systems take up less room in the atmosphere. So again, they're like a little sunfish out in the open ocean, which is a sailboat. A little sail, a little cute little boat. And any wind that's out there, that boat doesn't move very much. Whereas a larger boat, big old catamaran with a huge sail and the same wind setup, it moves along nice and brisk because that sail occupies more of the air. And it's not the same, but it's a good analogy here. This is like a little weaker system, literally, and the GFS, on the other hand, much deeper in the atmosphere, and it feels those steering the steering flow that curves it towards Mexico earlier. And that's the model that I think is going to end up being right, just based on the performance of the GFS. It's been pretty good as of late. All right, other stuff to talk about real quick. I know I'm going long today, but hey, there's a lot to talk about, so we'll do it. Convective outlooks, yes, it's severe weather season, sort of the second season, I guess you could say. Today, generally limited throughout the country, no big deal, but tomorrow, a slight risk of severe weather way up in the upper Midwest areas, so be mindful of that, very important. And then it really starts to get interesting, and this is the thing that's if the Euro ends up being right, and it's going to just be a weak system, category 1 at best, whatever, I'm going to go for this. And Brent can go to Mexico. It's something for he and I to sort out, but I want to make sure I don't miss something like that, which I can fly to Dallas or whatever and easily intercept. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about and look at over the next few days. But this is what's happening. Severe weather in the plains. We're going to have this deep trough cut in through here with a pretty powerful jet going through the area. Lots of dynamics involved. So this is day 3 coming up. So, it's on, what is that, Sunday. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday is day 3. And then we get out to the day 4 through 8 outlook. Monday's not too bad, but then Tuesday, yikes, once again, more energy starts to pop out into the southern plains there, right in the heart of Tornado Alley, a 15% area out there at day 5. That's pretty rare. Even in the heart of severe weather season in the spring, you don't see that very often. So pay attention to this. I will be covering it one way or the other, either in person, if I'm not in Mexico, or certainly talking about it here. Wouldn't it be fascinating if I could be in the plains on Sunday and also go to Mexico Monday? Maybe. We'll see about that. Whew, that's a lot to cover. Hey, look at this tweet. Talk about a bombshell. Wow, when I saw this tweet from Ben Knoll today, I literally was had to do a double take. Is this an old tweet? I mean, this is really, really important here, and I kind of saved it for the last, towards the last. What does he say? Let's get rid of me so I can show you. Big explanation point, and rightfully so. Ben coming in with the bombshell tweet. The North American Multi-Model Ensemble, that's what that means, update. Trending stronger with La Niña going into the winter time for the northern hemisphere, lingering well into 2022. So, wow. The monthly 3.4 index, which is roughly this area of the ENSO regions, roughly, is forecast to go down to negative 1.5 Celsius. That is a healthy La Niña. Very, very important here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into motion. I think if I click on it, it'll start playing. Indeed it does. December, January, look at that. Strengthens, begins to wane away early into next year, still hanging on. And then that last frame of his GIF animation, and this last part, way out there, it's June of next year, for goodness sakes. But the Atlantic is looking warmer than average next June. All throughout the Atlantic there, that warm AMO look and the lingering La Niña. All I'm going to say, because I know how the internet can be, naysayers, but I will remind you, these are giant climate signals versus an individual storm. And the modeling, I'm telling you, I've had Ben on Hurricane U episodes talking about this. The guidance at the long ranges are getting so much better now. I don't know how to explain why. That's a whole different ball game. But, and I'm not here to tell you, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen. But to see this guidance here, and remember, this is the multi-model ensemble. It's not one run of one climate model, and this is what it says. It's the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. And this is a little bit eye-opening, both eyes, right? Interesting. The winter coming up, a significant La Niña pattern. And then as we get into next year, look at that. And just I'll end on this note. It's already there. The Atlantic warmer than average. The La Niña coming on solid. Wow. Interesting times ahead if you are a fan of watching the weather. Nobody's a fan of destructive weather. At least I hope not. That's a little different. But, you know, when it does get interesting, we're all interested in it. And that's what I'm here to tell you about. Hurricanes mostly. Follow on these different social media, right? Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We are supported by our great group of 900 strong now all across the world on Patreon. Patreon.com/HurricaneTrack. Which, by the way, later today, I will be dropping episode 4 of season 2 of the Hurricane Highway. We have our own little gallery, almost our little mini Netflix, if you will, of hurricane documentaries going all the way back to 2004. A great bunch of content, all aggregated in one spot. We've got our podcast series, our live cams, a chat. It's just, there's a lot more to this than, you know, begging for money, as the negative people like to say. We are literally building something that is unique and absolutely extraordinary, and it's because of you people on your side of the screen. And if you want to get involved, that's how you do it. I made it easy, too. You can just point your device right there at that QR code. And for $10 a month, I mean, if we doubled where we are right now, it wouldn't even be a question. I'd be all over the world doing stuff, not just me personally, but sending different people in different places. We got a bunch of ideas, and you guys can help make it possible. But, you know, on the reward side of things, like what else do I get for this besides great weather coverage? Again, these documentaries that I put out, the original series podcast called Stories from the Hurricane Highway, all of these things, including one more thing, then I'll let you go, an amazing, almost 6-hour special, I call it my Zack Snyder cut. You know, he did that Justice League 4-hour movie that came out. I think it was exclusively on HBO Max or whatever, but if you know Zack Snyder, you know what I'm talking about. I took my Michael stuff, coming up on 3 years since Michael, and I have made like a 5-hour movie, whatever you want to call it, of the raw video. Literally no editing. It has been digitally enhanced, you know, remastered, as they say, to bring out the contrast and the colors better. I've gotten better editing equipment since 3 years ago. And there's a nice little intro that shows the moment where Brent and I set up the GoPro at Mexico Beach. And then it's just raw. No music, no chatter from me. Timestamp at the bottom so you see exactly every minute that goes by. And it's like that show 24. Remember with Kiefer Sutherland? It was a 24-hour real-time events thing. And at the beginning of each episode, he would say, events occur in real time. That's my Kiefer Sutherland impression. Yes, it's real time as it happened. It's called The Michael Project. And I'm dropping that exclusively on Patreon Sunday. So, you know, giving you reasons to become part of this. And I think once you do, you'll stick around and you'll be part of something absolutely incredible. All right? All right. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I know I went long, but we had a lot to talk about. And you guys, you know, you're my peeps, right? You're the people that make this worth it in the end. So I appreciate it very much that you are on your side listening and paying attention to me. I appreciate it more than you know. I really do. Have a great weekend. I'll be out. Let me try again. Have a great weekend. I will be around doing updates. I'll let you know what's happening with all these systems and what I decide to do. Mexico, the Great Plains, both. We'll see. Bottom line, you guys have a great rest of your Friday. I'm Mark Suttoth, HurricaneTrack.com. We'll talk again later on.